Hi, welcome to Math with Karen. Let's talk decimals. So last video in our decimal series, we talked about place value and we talked about tenths. We talked about decimals are fractions written in a different way. So we're going to add on to that today, and we're going to introduce and practice a little bit more with the next place value. So we talked about looking at a whole amount as this. This would be one whole. And these we talked about being tenths because there are 10 rods inside of a whole. And then now we're going to introduce the hundredths because each little square, there are 100 of them in here. So we're talking hundredths. So our new place is called the hundredths place that we're going to work with today. So we have our ones, our decimal, which we say and, our tenths, and our hundredths. Now, when I introduce decimals, I also like to talk about money because money is real life things. So when we talk about money, I always talk to them about, well, imagine if this was $1. If this was $1, how many dimes does it take to make $1? Well, it's 10 dimes, and each dime is 10 cents. Then we talk about the penny. Well, how much is a penny? It's 1 cent. How many pennies are in $1? 100. And we also write money using decimals anyway. So when we look at this, I say until you get really good and firm with decimals, you can always think of these 10 rods as dimes and these hundreds, these little ones blocks, as pennies. So when we look at this right here, we can see that we have no ones. We have no dollar bills, but we still need to put a digit in that place. So in the ones place, we would write a 0 because we don't have a whole amount. And then, of course, we're going to put our decimal, which is where we will say and then we're going to count our tenths. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tenths. So we're going to put our 6 in our tenths place, and then we'll count our hundredths. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 hundredths. So we're going to put that in that place. Now, if I was to go back to the fractions of, I have 100 in a whole, and I would have 6 tenths shaded and 4 hundredths shaded, I would write that as 64 hundredths. So if I was to write it as a decimal, I can always use this chart to model it until I get really good and confident with it. And I can see that it is a 0 in the ones place, a decimal, and then 64. Now, how we would say that is when there are no ones, we don't say 0. We just don't say anything for the ones. We don't have to say and because we're not talking about whole and a part. We are only talking about the part. So we're going to start there. And a lot of times they want to say 0 and, which is not wrong, but it's not very common. It's almost like, let's make a little shortcut here and take that part out. So we would actually say what we see here, which we see 64, and then you say the last place that it's in. So that's where you get your 64 hundredths. So a lot of times it's good to write down some decimals and just practice saying them until they are, they're very sure about that. So that would be a really good practice for you to do. If you have dimes and pennies, pull those out. And let's talk about, okay, we have how many dimes? Those are our tenths. How many pennies? Those are our hundredths. And then put them together and say, well, how would we say that? Well, if we were talking money, we would call this 64 cents. But if you think about it, 100 cents makes a whole dollar. So 64 hundredths is the same as 64 cents. So that is how we would do hundredths. And then let's talk a bit here. If you were giving them maybe a little practice of fraction to decimals. Now, of course, we're only looking at tenths and hundredths at this point in our lives. So you could write down a couple of different fractions and let them practice. So let's say we have 29 hundredths. How would you write that in your chart to make it a decimal? Well, I have 29 hundredths. There's no whole number, so I know I'd have to put a 0. And then I just fill in my chart, 29 hundredths. So then I would have 29 hundredths. Same amount, just written in 2 different ways. I will show you the ones that really throw them. Okay, so if you did like 7 hundredths, it kind of throws them. So when you do 7 hundredths and practice with just pennies, less than 10 pennies, no dimes, it's only in the hundredths place. So when you do that, of course, I'm out of room. I'm going to write it up here. I have no ones. I have a decimal because I have a part, right? But there are no tenths. There are no dimes. So I do have to fill a digit into that place. And there are 7 pennies, which would go here. So 7 hundredths actually has an extra 0 in there in the tenths place. That's something they need to practice, something that they need to see. So let's review. We have introduced the hundredths place. We've talked about dimes and pennies, pulling that in. You can actually have those in their hands and give them that practice using the money. Plus, it's going to give them a good sense of money as well. Practice going back and forth from decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. So I didn't really talk about that. So let me do one real quick. Let's say I have let's do one down here. Let's say I have 1 and 14 hundredths. All right. So, look what I did. I combined them, didn't I? Let's try that again. We all make mistakes. And that's one thing I want them to understand is it's okay to make mistakes. It is okay to do that. So if I have 1 and 14 hundredths, if I have $1.14, you can pull out a dollar bill. How many dimes would I need right here? How many pennies would I need right here? So then you talk about, okay, well, we have 1 whole. That's our whole number. And if 14 cents out of 100 pennies makes, is part of the dollar, how would we write that? How would we say this? How would we write that? Well, this is 1 and 14 hundredths. Their brain should already know what fractions with hundredths. That would have a hundredth as their denominator. And of course, you had 14 pennies. So I know that was really quick. Use the dollars, use the dimes, use the pennies, and have them write the things down and practice saying them the correct way. All right. So if this has been helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel, and I will continue to get out some more math videos. What I want to work on in our next video is comparing decimals. I'll see you there.